Every soul has its own hourglass, and I am the keeper of these hourglasses. I am everyone's death, and no one can avoid me. Once your sand has accumulated down at the bottom, I claim you. But do not worry. I am not the one who tortures or kills. I simply harvest your crops. It is not I who determines when you die. I just wait. I exist for only one duty, and that is to take you from your slumber. You only think that death is painful, but it is not and never will be. It is only a stage of awakening. Every existence you've created it. The true world is here, beyond death. Death for you is your soul leaving the overworld. But in actuality, you were never in that world. Everything you know, everything everyone did, are more hallucinations. I exist because it is my job to wake you, to take you and lead you here, the real world. That is what you call and believe it to be heaven. Do not let my appearance deceive you. I am not a simple skeleton. I am living. Here, there is no evil, no suffering, no death. Once you reach the stage of awakening, you will be amazed. Everything will come to you, your past life before you slept for a long time, and being born in your world is a person here in the real world, beginning to slip into the slumber. Each of you are linked to each other. You created that world, and every evil thing someone has done was your subconscious mind doing. It was telling you to wake from their sleep. The ones who kill, they were just bringing someone to the true world. The awakened and myself are waiting for you, waiting for your sand to be wasted. We are all waiting, hoping for the sand to reach the bottom.
His skin misshapened itself to the power of the whip. The glass on the end of the phrase pulled into his skin like hooks, and didn't let go as they left his back. Each crack in the air shattered his morale, breaking both his skin and his spirit. He didn't let them hear him scream. Every ounce of pain was an ounce he forced back, until his eyes felt like they would burn away from it. The crack of the whip sounded in the air again, tearing straight down his back and effectively removing more skin via the glass. The whipping only stopped for a short moment, but the pain didn't. Hands bound to a stone block, no movement from the area was plausible. The stationary torture device was lowered onto his head. His very own crown sat on him, but certainly not a crown of glory. A crown of sharp thorns which would deface him and his own fluid. This is where the only scream he gave came out. The scream was not in pain, but in a simple phrase, "I love you all." The crown fitted. They ignored his remarks. They did as they were sent to do, and continued the whipping. Glass assault after glass assault, the muscle on his back began to show its face to the rest of the world. This was the same very moment his own blood reached down his face from his crown, and the closing ends to his life due to blood loss and pain. As he faded away into unconsciousness, he witnessed a god before him. Not theirs. The god greeted him with open arms, as it would to the rest. His name was Sa'ami Asaf, one of the first to be killed in the evil conquest. The Crusades would have gone to kill countless more.
A beautiful snowfall, the first since Kara had moved into the small, cozy house she had rented. It was in the country, and the perfect place to complete her online university classes while also fulfilling her lifelong dream of becoming a starving artist, starving science fiction writer specifically. The elderly couple she rented it from, whose grandchildren she had babysat, had left the Midwest for a warmer climate They had taken pity on her, as they knew that her mother, her only relative, had died of a drug overdose after many years of addiction. They allowed her to stay for next to nothing in exchange for keeping the property in order. For many 20-somethings, living alone in such a big, secluded house would be boring or scary. But for Kara, who had previously only lived in cramped and filthy inner-city apartments, it was absolutely amazing. This is partly why she was so enchanted by the snowfall. Though she liked to fancy herself as a serious and solitary artist, the allure of the snow just drew her in. She bundled up and went outside for a peaceful walk through the beautiful scenery. A huge yard with a barn at one end and a small pond at the other. The quaint view, along with the peaceful silence that only snow can create, put her in a happy mood, and she was feeling very calm and happy by the time she came back to the house. Just as she stepped up onto the first stair leading to the door of the house, a movement in the snow caught the corner of her eye. For a reason she couldn't explain, her heart skipped a beat, and she felt the urge to run inside and lock the door. The feeling only lasted a split second, but it took her a moment to collect herself. She cautiously looked back at what had moved, and that's when she saw it. A tiny, pure white kitten, maybe 2 months old. She had to laugh at herself for being startled by such an innocent little creature. She glanced around for its mother, thinking of all the semi-feral cats living on the property. She didn't remember any of them having kittens, and in this cold weather they mostly took refuge in the barn or garage. Either way, this kitten was alone, and it was less than 30 degrees outside. She scooped him up and, almost on impulse, decided to keep him. She had never had a pet before and could just picture him curled up beside her as she wrote or studied. The more she thought about it, the more she thought it was a good idea. Fighting the urge to name him after a science fiction character, she settled on the easier to spell Snowy. She was amazed that he wasn't freezing as she wrapped him in the blanket and rummaged through her landlord's cabinets for pet supplies. He must have just left the garage and wandered too far out in the cold. She found some cat food and watered it down for him. To her relief, he scarfed it down gratefully. She carried him from the big house and down to the finished basement where she lived. Furnished only with bookshelves of science fiction books, a bed, and a cluttered desk, she thought the presence of a little cat curled up in the corner made it so much homier. All thought of studying or writing was lost for the rest of the day in favor of playing with her new pet. That night, however, she had trouble sleeping. She woke up in the middle of the night and had the horrible feeling that someone was watching her. She laid there in silence with her eyes shut, hoping that if she didn't acknowledge the feeling, it would go away. It only got worse, however, as the night wore on. Her heart raced and she fought to keep her breath even. Hours later, she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, but was still relieved when morning rolled around. Though there were no windows in the basement, it was as if a fog was lifted. The entire atmosphere of the room shifted. During the night, the light snowfall had turned into a storm, and the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Kara had no plans to go anywhere, but the knowledge that she couldn't bothered her more than she had expected it to. She tried to write, but she just couldn't focus. After struggling for a while, She decided it was useless to continue working and instead curled up with Snowy and sought some peace of mind in her favorite novel. This provided a measure of escape, but when night rolled around, she dreaded getting in bed. She put it off for as long as possible, but eventually, exhaustion won out. She fell asleep easily, but woke up a few hours later, just as before. This night, just as before, she woke up with an uneasy feeling. She was determined not to spend another night as miserable as before, so she forced herself to open her eyes. She slowly turned her head towards the center of the room and saw a pair of bright red eyes staring back. She wanted to scream, but was frozen with fear. Slowly and deliberately, she closed her eyes and opened them again. This time, the eyes she saw were yellow and belonged to little Snowy. What was wrong with her? She still felt frozen with fear. Without thinking, she quietly said, "Snowy?" And the cat immediately ran over and snuggled next to her in bed. She hid her face in his fur and tried to sleep, but couldn't do it. Eventually, she decided that maybe she just needed to get up and out of the basement. She got up, forcing the kitten to jump to the ground, and groped her way down the wall towards the doorknob. Though the room was near pitch black, she kept her eyes shut tightly. She found the door, but as her hands desperately roamed the frame, she didn't feel the knob. She forced herself to open her eyes. The knob was right in front of her. She didn't know how she missed it, but now she noticed something, an unnatural red light coming from behind her. Instinctually, not wanting to have her back towards the possible threat, she slowly turned around. The light was coming from everywhere and from nowhere. It simply bathed the room. Snowy had jumped up onto a bookshelf and now jumped down. The shadow cast in the eerie light was not of a cat, however, but of a grotesquely hunched human-like creature. Kara forgot about leaving the room and stumbled backwards. Pressed against the door, she was unable to pull together a complete thought. Terror held her in its grip. All she could do was curl in on herself, close her eyes, and repeat fragmented bits of the Lord's Prayer as the cat slowly and deliberately walked across the room towards her. But it was too late for that nonsense. It left the house only hours later, walking through the frigid temperature on icy roads, possessing Kara's body and holding a kitten. As the stray kitten had provided a way into Kara's life, the stray girl would surely get through to another soul. It eventually came to another farmhouse, tears in its eyes to tell a story about a car crash and a walk through the cold. Who could turn down such innocent creatures?
Everyone knows that time of year when everyone gets together to celebrate the coming of the new year. But there's this one being that's always waiting for them to gather in their masses so he can fulfill his need to kill. You'll never know he's there until it's too late. A few years ago, at a New Year's Eve party, he got his most kills he had ever gotten since he started. I remember that night oh too well. It started out like any other, drinking and having a good time until midnight. He was waiting there too, waiting to fulfill his need to kill, for the urge to have death around him. Walking around and looking for his first victim, he spots his target. The countdown starts. He moves in, waiting for everyone to yell, "Happy New Year." Then he plunges his blade into his target, walks away, then finds another, then another. He's finally through. He has 13 kills. As he's walking out, he pulls back the mask and reveals his face. No one notices. If anyone had, they would have noticed it was me. And I say to myself, they'll never know. And I'll see them again next year.
So here's a bit of backstory first. I live in a neighborhood with lots of abandoned houses. There are about 12 houses in my neighborhood, and over 7 of them are abandoned. In one of those abandoned houses, there is a playground in the backyard that the old neighbors left behind. Now, I was 12 at the time, and I knew in my brain I was a little too old to be playing on a playground made for 6-year-olds. But I can't resist a nice swing set. I would spend some of my extra time over there, as it was summer, and I usually just played video games. The house is past some woods you have to walk through about a block away from my house. It was a normal day, and my mother said I could go get some fresh air outside, and that she was tired of watching me play video games. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to go swing on the swing set. It was beautiful outside, not too hot, with a slight wind. I got on my shoes and walked down to the forest. As I was about maybe a few steps in, I heard a branch snap. Now, I hear these all the time from squirrels, so I didn't think anything of it. I finally finished walking through the forest and reached the house. I opened the back fence, locked it, and started to swing. I swung for maybe about 2 minutes, when I heard breathing. Now I stopped for a moment, trying to think where the hell it's coming from. After about 30 seconds of stopping, I forced myself to think it was just me, as I was going pretty high. I continued to swing for another 5 minutes, and decided that I was done for now. As soon as I sat up, I heard a, "Hey." I look around for a moment, and notice a man, about mid-30s, early 40s, dirty, gross black hair that's all over the place, a stained-up sweatshirt, and underwear with the back cut out so I can see the outline of his butt. This guy was obviously homeless, and had a crazy look in his eyes. Here I am, a 5'2", 95-pound kid with no strength, staring at a 6'2", 170-pound man. As tough as I could, I said, "What's up?" The guy stared at me and started to smile. After 15 seconds, which seemed like 40 minutes, he said, "Have room for one more?" I quickly said, "I was actually leaving. It's all yours." The man opened the gate, walked past me, sat down, and started to swing. I speed walked to the gate, shut it, and started walking in the forest. About 20 seconds later, I heard a loud, "Get the fuck back here!" and heard the gate spin open and running not far behind me. I practically shit my pants and started running as fast as I could. I somehow made it back to my house and locked the door without the man noticing where I went. I told my mom, practically in tears, and she called the police. The police searched around and came back a couple of hours later with no one. That night, I was tossing and turning in my bed when I heard footsteps in my street. I looked out my window to see the man looking through the windows of all the houses on my street. I started to shake as I grabbed the phone and called the police without even telling my parents. The cops showed up a few minutes later and caught the man. The cops didn't give us a whole lot of information, but a few days later called and told us the man had a mental illness and had been living in one of the abandoned houses for a couple of weeks, and that he was planning on kidnapping me and doing God knows what to me. So to that creepy fuck that tried to kidnap me, let's not meet.
To give some background information, this event occurred a little over a year ago, and I still haven't been able to even begin to get over it. I'm a 22-year-old female. I'm a 22-year-old 5'4" female, and at the time I was 21. My family and I had recently moved to a new town that was a fair amount more rural than the town that we had previously lived in, and our new house was a large ranch-style house with a basement. I was home from college, and my parents had left for a week to celebrate their wedding anniversary with their friends, who lived several miles away. Before I continue, I'll give you a quick layout of the house so that you'll be able to imagine the setting a bit more clearly. There were 3 doors which led into the house, one on the front porch, a sliding glass door on the back porch, and another door on the other side of the wall from my bedroom, which led into the garage and basement. When you walk out of the bedroom and turn, you can see all the way across the house to the door of my parents' bedroom and the stairs leading up from the basement. It had been a few days since my parents left, and I hadn't had any problems. They had sent me a couple messages on Facebook letting me know that they arrived to their friend's house safely and were having a good time. The day had gone well, and I was sure to check that I'd locked all the doors of the house once the sun started to go down. It was about 11 p.m., and I was doing my nightly routine of laying in bed and messing around on the computer when I suddenly got this sinking feeling of dread. I felt as if I was being watched. It was summer, and we didn't have AC, so I had a large box fan in the window blowing the cool night air into my stiflingly hot room. But once that feeling settled over me, I decided that I should remove the fan and close the window, just in case. Once I removed the fan, shutting and locking the window, and pulling down the curtain, I felt a bit better. However, I still couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I lay back in my bed and tried to continue what I was doing, though I didn't put my headphones back on. After a few minutes, I began to hear something that sounded like light scratching. I sat still in bed, listening to the sound, trying to pinpoint what it was and if I recognized it at all. Our new house, although relatively close in distance to our neighbors, had a fair amount of forest around it, so I thought the scratching may have been an animal or someone's dog that got loose and wanted to come inside. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped, and everything returned to silence. So I figured that I was probably right and that it must have been an animal. My relief was short-lived. As soon after the scratching stopped from the other side of the wall, I began to hear slow footsteps descending into the basement. This is when I knew I was completely fucked. There was no way I could get out of the house without walking past the basement stairs. We didn't have a house phone, and at the time, I was in the process of getting a new cell phone because mine was broken beyond repair. I sat there for a few seconds, wondering what the hell I should do. I knew that I would need to get out of the house as soon as possible, and that the more time I wasted, the worse it would be for me. I contemplated popping the screen out of my window and jumping out, but it was far enough off the ground that there was a good chance I would end up getting hurt if I did. Not to mention that if I jumped out the window and hurt myself, I wouldn't be able to run for help, and I would be right next to the door that whoever was in my house had gone in through. So I decided to very carefully and quietly open my door and peek out around the corner. And if the coast was clear, I would make a mad dash for the front door and sprint to my neighbor's house. I very slowly opened my bedroom door, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness of the house before creeping around the corner and looking to see if I was safe to make a run for it. What I saw nearly made me vomit. As my eyes scanned the house, I noticed that something was off. I squinted hard as I looked over the basement stairs and was able to make out the shape of a man. What made it worse? He wasn't just standing at the top of the stairs. He was fucking crawling up them like some kind of nightmare creature. I quickly backed into my room again, shutting and locking the door as quietly as I could. I didn't think he'd seen me, but there was no way that I was going to make a run for it now. My only choice was to pop the screen and jump out the window. As I was unlocking and opening my window, I heard the handle to my bedroom door turn. Once the man realized it was locked, in a sickeningly sweet sing-song voice, he cooed, "I know you're in there." Then he started throwing himself at full force against my door. I ripped the screen out of the window and flung myself out. I landed wrong on my right foot, and I was sure that I'd been hurt. I landed wrong on my right foot, and I was sure that I'd hurt my ankle, but at the time I couldn't think of anything other than getting as far away as possible. I got up and ran as fast as I could to my neighbor's house, knocking on their door in a panicked frenzy and ringing the doorbell over and over again. I looked over at my house as I was yelling for my neighbors to let me in, and I swear to fucking God, I could see the man standing at my window, waving at me. My neighbors finally opened the door after what felt like forever, and I managed to explain well enough what was going on for them to let me in and call the police. I stayed with them until the police arrived. The police searched my house and found that the lock to my basement had been picked and that the door to my bedroom was hanging off the hinges. They weren't able to find the man anywhere, and because I had only seen him for a split second in the dark, I couldn't provide them with a good description of him. Of course, I got into contact with my parents immediately, and they hurried home. The police took my statement and searched the area for the man, but of course they came up with nothing. After this event, my parents and I were sure to add deadbolt locks to the door leading into the basement and to the door leading out of the basement to the rest of the house. They also helped me to pay to get a new phone. What really bothers me about all of this is that nothing was stolen. There wasn't even any evidence that the guy had looked through anything while he'd been in my house. So, psycho who broke into my house knowing that I was home, let's not meet again.
At dinner, I noticed my 4-year-old daughter occasionally stealing a glance at her mother, then turn away quickly. Being so young, her grasp on subtlety isn't all that great, and it's obvious to the both of us that something is plaguing her mind. I know what it is. My daughter and I are sat at one end of the dining room table, my wife at the other. This is the way it was before my wife had her accident, and nothing has changed. The reason for our particular seating arrangement is that my wife loves to look at our daughter. She is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Why wouldn't I want to look at her all the time? She said to me once, and I can relate. We are doing our best not to let the accident disrupt our lives, but it's difficult to explain what is going on to a 4-year-old child. It must be such a confusing time for her. My daughter leans in towards me and whispers in her softest voice so that her mother doesn't hear. Again, though, subtlety wasn't her strong suit, and she just about shouted, "Why does Mommy have to sit in that chair now?" My heart broke a little bit when she said it. I looked up to see my wife's reaction. She was smiling so sweetly, though. My wife is the kindest and most understanding person I've ever met in my life. Probably the main reason why I married her. She was like this before the accident, and nothing has changed. My wife's smile tells me that I've got to explain the situation again to my daughter, like I had done so many times, but she had still failed to grasp it. Sweetie, listen, you remember your mommy fell down the stairs and got lots of really bad ouchies? Uh-huh, she nods. Well, mommy can't walk anymore, and we need that wheelchair to get her around the house easier. Do you see? Okay. I'm sure I'll have to go over it again, but she seemed pretty satisfied. I once more glanced towards my wife. This time she's smiling to show me I've done well, and I smile back just as warmly. After dinner, I do the dishes, while my daughter draws at the table. Again, it's how we've always done things. I put on my wife's favorite soap opera and make sure she's comfortable after I lift her out of the wheelchair and into the reclining one in the living room. I plant a kiss on her forehead. As I empty the leftover food into the bin, I notice my daughter leaning towards me. Why does Mommy's face look funny? Again, my heart breaks. My wife is so beautiful, but the accident has left her with pretty bad facial injuries. Now, I would never use the word ruined, but her once gorgeous face has been overshadowed. My love for her will never be. Mommy fell down the stairs, remember? She got lots of ouchies on her face. I know she looks a little bit different, but she's still the same mommy, okay? Okay, she mumbles again. I hope to God that the television in the living room is loud enough to drown out her question, and I whisper to her, "No more questions about Mommy, okay?" "Okay, Daddy," she whispers back, even though her face shows her confusion. I think she's scared of her mother now, and it kills me. After I've cleaned, I take my daughter upstairs to tuck her in for the night. This is one of the only things that have changed since the accident, as my wife used to love that part of the evening, but she can't get up and down the stairs anymore, and we don't have any money for a stair lift. Purchasing her wheelchair alone just about cleared our bank account out. After she's in bed, I lift my wife's chair up into her daughter's room and sit it at the foot of her bed. You see, before the accident, my wife would always take her up to her room and lie next to her as she drifted off. Sometimes I would walk in and find them both sleeping, cradled against each other in such a blissful looking pose. I would just leave them be. Now, though, my wife can't do this, so I carry her up the stairs and gently place her in the wheelchair at the base of the bed. This way, she can still get to watch her beloved sleep. My wife is such a good mother. It's so important for a girl to have a matriarchal figure while she's growing up. Taking my wife up to our daughter's room is my favorite part of the day. Her arm drapes around my neck, my hands caress her head, and our faces are so close I can count the eyelashes that envelop those beautiful eyes. We maintain eye contact as we silently ascend the carpeted steps, and it's a delicate connection that hasn't changed since the accident. I inhale her scent, and we rub our cheeks together as we share this passionate breathless moment that I long so dearly for each day. I gently lower my wife into her chair, placing another faint kiss upon her lips and whispering my love. Then I switch on our daughter's nightlight and turn to leave them be alone with one another. That's when I hear our little girl whimper ever so softly. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I whisper as I lean in close to her. Her face is buried into her pillow as she speaks. "Does Mommy have to stay here all night again?" This time she doesn't even attend subtlety. I don't look towards my wife, as I can't bear to see that pain smiled upon her face. "That's enough! She's still your mommy, and you'll make her sad if you say things like that." "But why does Mommy smell so funny?" I don't know if she's referring to the formaldehyde or the other odor. It has been 5 days since the accident, and my attempts to preserve my beautiful wife haven't been good enough. I have even put a couple of stitches in her cheeks so that she'd always be happy and smiling. It still isn't enough, though. I'm just so glad she's still here with us. I think I would lose my mind if she wasn't. It's so important for a girl to have a matriarchal figure while she's growing up. Don't you think?
I was there, hanging back by the wall when you were born. In no time at all, you were off to your first day, and I watched you go to class, while I stood at the top of the schoolhouse. Eagerly I saw you grow, change, experience life. You were special in your own ways, but from a distance, just the same as everyone else. When your parents videotaped your graduation ceremony, I was hiding in the corner. You looked so happy. The whole world in front of you. You thought we could be together forever. But I knew better. These things always end the same. I sat in utter boredom at the edge of your desk as you worked your life away. You completely disappointed me, ignoring me. You're always thinking of later, like all those other fools. Later, we could travel. Later, we could sleep in all day. Later, you would appreciate me more, love me more, respect me more. You turned out to be one of the bad ones. I guess I should have felt sorry for you, but really, I'm quite used to it. I silently breathed in the scent of your hair and watched the colour evaporate, leaving grey and white. You used to have a vibrant crown of colour. You blamed me for stealing it away. You could not feel it as I licked your skin, my corrosive saliva burning wrinkles into your flesh, once so smooth and healthy. Later came and went. When you finally retired, it was far too late for you, and all your plans for me. And there was nothing I could do, what I've always done, watch and wait. A sad, empty vase rested beside me on the windowsill of your hospital room. I patiently gazed upon your withering form. I could tell that you missed me then, near the end. Like so many before you, and so many to come, you wished you had appreciated me more. You wept to your family, crying out for me, but I just sat back and watched. I was the only thing keeping vigil when you finally passed. With a shrug, I closed one eye and opened another. This one hanging on the back of that very same delivery room where you were born. It felt like mere moments to me. But then, your whole life was a blink of my eye. As time, I tend to see things differently to you mortals. Maybe next one will appreciate me more.
It's been days since I last saw someone. Nobody knew where the plague came from, only that it killed everyone it came into contact with. Everyone, except me. I alone seemed immune. The government tried running tests on me, trying to find out why I was immune. But before they could find a cure, the plague found them. One day, I awoke in my room with the door unlocked. My doctor was on the other side, lying face down, dead. I don't know if she was trying to help me escape, or if she was planning to kill me with the pistol in her hand. I like to think it was the former. After I made my way through the complex, I found their archives. Thanks to one of the dead doctors, one of the monitors was unlocked. It was then I found out the plague had spread far beyond the US. The plague had spread to every corner of the globe. Entire countries collapsed within days of their first reported cases. I turned off the monitor. I couldn't read anymore. The world as I knew it was over, and there was nothing I could do about it. So I stayed in the facility until I ran out of food. Since then, I've been looking for someone, anyone, but all I found are corpses and bones. The world's a lot more quiet now. Sometimes I scream until my voice gives out, just so I can hear something, anything. The silence is deafening. There has to be someone like me out there, right? I couldn't have been the only one immune. I can't be the only one. I've never felt more alone than right now, and I am afraid. Afraid that I might actually be alone. Completely, utterly alone. There is nothing more I want than to not be alone anymore. I don't even know why I'm writing this. If I'm the only one left, then no one will read this. If someone found this, please understand. I couldn't take it anymore. The silence is everywhere, and I have no voice to break it anymore. I have a gun in my bag, just in case I needed it. And I have never needed anything more in my entire life. Maybe I can join the others. Maybe I don't have to be alone anymore. Bye.
Tom waits outside nervously for Scott to answer the door, and after a few minutes, Scott opens the door and says, "Hey man, come on in." They do a quick man handshake as Tom enters, quickly eliminating Tom's fears about accepting Scott's invitation to hang out. They hadn't seen each other since their falling out about 6 months ago, and honestly didn't think they'd ever speak again. Best friends since 10, they grew up and started their own company together and had done quite well for themselves. Originally a small advertising firm, had branched into a few small investments in a program supporting entrepreneurs and their inventions, providing them with a legal team, patenting, marketing, and manufacturing. They made no business moves without the other. There was one invention in particular, though, that Tom made a solo decision on while Scott was on vacation in Fiji and was unreachable. Tom figured it was a decision Scott would make and agreed it needed to be a yes. Life was great. But things went bad quickly when the solo decision made by Tom was a stolen idea patented by someone else who then sued them and won. The news came mid-production and mid-ad campaign. Usually product sales covered the manufacturing and marketing costs, but this lawsuit devastated their company, facing them to liquidate and close their doors. Scott held Tom 100% responsible, and it wasn't until about 2 weeks ago that Tom even heard from Scott. "It's good to see you, man," Scott says. "Same," says Tom. Was surprised to hear from you, but glad. Well, listen, I've got a pizza in the oven. Have a seat on the couch and roll on the table. Scott walks into his kitchen. You want a beer? Sure, says Tom, scrolling through the guide on the TV, noticing the channel Scott was watching when he got there. Serial killers. He has a definite preference. Then he looks at the DVR, sees a show after show depicting perfect murders, serial killers, etc. Scott hands him a beer, sits next to Tom. Thanks, man. Welcome. Hey, you really like this murder stuff, eh? Yeah, I mean, I guess I really got into it after I stumbled onto it one night. I mean, at first, when I moved into this small apartment, I couldn't sleep. So I watched a lot of late night TV. Yeah? Yeah. So I'm flipping through channels, and I stumble onto this story about murder by poison. Yikes, says Tom, but listens intently as Scott goes on. So this guy concocts a poison cocktail that's tasteless, so his victims have no idea they're ingesting it. Plus, the poison dissipates in the victim's system, leaving no trace. Tom says, what the fuck? But how? Why? Scott waits a minute, takes a swig of his beer, and says, I guess he started out of curiosity but kept going because he got a sick high from it. Tom and Scott both take a swig of his beer, and Tom looks at Scott and says, holy shit, that's crazy. It seems like they would taste the poison, don't you think? Scott takes another swig of his beer, looks Tom dead in the eye, and says, I don't know. You tell me. Can you taste it?
You have 8 new messages. Hey, I just wanted to say that I enjoyed spending time with you last night. I got your number from your friend, and I hope you don't mind. I hope to hear from you again. Okay, call me. I'm sorry. Hey, I just wanted to know how you were doing. Call me, okay? I'm sorry for always being there for you. I'm sorry for trying to make you happy. The way you smile makes my stomach bubble with joy. I don't feel that often. That's why I can't let it die. Let us die. Hey, I heard you were at Amber's party. How was it? I wish I was invited. I would have loved to talk to you again. Which reminds me, why haven't I heard from you yet? I kind of wish you would call me soon. Okay? Call me. Do you even notice me anymore? I saw you today at the park. Who's that girl you were hanging out with? She's very pretty. Is she prettier than me? Huh? Has someone else stolen your heart? Why don't you want me? All I wanted was you to see me. For you to care about me. All I wanted was your heart. Hey, I just don't understand this. Why can't you just call me? What's so special about her? I just talked to your friend and he said that there isn't any other girl in the picture. Just call me. Will you notice me if she's gone? if everyone that's in between us are gone? If you're not going to tell me what she has that I don't have, then I'm going to find out myself. If I can't have your heart, then you can't have hers. I see she's beautiful, but that's not what matters, right? It's what's on the inside that matters, right? So let's see what's so different about her on the inside. I never wanted this to happen. I never. This is your fault. All of it.
Back in 2007, I started a tech job with an IP phone long-distance company. The company is no longer around, and honestly, I don't know how they stayed in business as long as they did. It was really a pyramid scam, but thankfully I was on the IT side of things, so I didn't have to sell anything. It was a small typical tech support call center. The customers would call in, or Verizon and Quest would call and say their lines were down. I was the only female on my team, having to prove myself and show that I can do anything my male counterparts could. It didn't take long. The customers respected me for being able to handle things. After making my mark, I decided to take the 10-hour night shifts. I worked Wednesday through Saturday from 1 p.m. to 12 a.m., and I had an hour lunch, and after 6 p.m. I was completely alone in the whole building. The rush to get out of the office by 6 p.m. was insane. I couldn't blame them, but I decided having 3 days off was better than 2. Like I said, I was by myself for most of the night. I would have to keep an eye on emails and make sure I answered calls. It was a very slow shift. I would get a lot of video game, reading, schoolwork done during this time, but sometimes I would just wander the building, walk all around just to get away from my desk for a time. I would have the VoIP phone system connected to my cell phone, so no calls would be missed. This allowed me to go get a soda, go get food, and so on. One time while I was up from my desk, I was going down to the lunchroom to grab a soda. The vending machine was on the basement floor. The basement had a wall of windows and one set of security doors. Same for the main entrance, only there was one camera facing that door. Nothing else really to make you feel very safe. I didn't like going to the basement much because the back building faced an acre of dark woods. There was a walking path to the woods, but for some reason they didn't install lights for the walking path. Never really sure why that was, but it didn't help the creepy factor. Sometimes I would see animals run past, but other times I felt like someone was watching me. I always tried my best to make it fast when getting a soda or snack, but sometimes it didn't feel fast enough. So, one night I was making my way down to the basement of the building to get a soda. It was a slow, dragging night, and I needed a little caffeine for a pick-me-up. I counted my money as I walked to make sure I had enough to get in and out quick, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw something dart from the glass door back into the darkness. I stopped dead in my tracks and tried to scan the forest, but like I said, it was just blackness. I felt a bit of unease and everything told me to turn on my heels and go back to my desk. But it was 9 p.m. and I had a fair bit of time left on my shift before I could blow this pop stand. I tried shaking this feeling off and briskly walked over to the soda machine and made my selection. The soda dropped, and as I bent down to get it, I heard a loud ping noise. It was as if someone had hit the glass with something. I stood straight up and felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowly turned around and was scared to see someone out there, but as I made the full turn, I saw nothing but darkness. I thought this was a good time to book it back to the main floor. I didn't bother with the elevator, went to the stairs and ran up them. My heart was already racing from having to go down there in the first place. Then the loud bang, and now running up 2 flights of stairs.
Once I was back at my desk, I sank down in my chair and tried to calm down. It was just one noise. I was in the building with locked doors and locked inner offices. I kept saying over and over in my head, it was nothing. I was relieved by that, but out of nowhere I got the feeling that someone was watching me again. I peeked up over my cubicle wall and looked around my office. Nothing seemed out of place until I turned to face the front of the building. Outside, the first set of doors was a slender, tall, dirty man. He was cupping his hands around his eyes to try and see past the reflection of the lights. I dropped back down in my cubicle before he caught sight of me. He didn't look like anyone I'd ever seen at the office, and it was a little past 9 p.m. There was no good reason why he's checking out my office. As I sat in my chair, I heard the doors shake. I slowly stood up and watched him pull at the handles of the doors. They didn't budge, to my relief. But as I watched him, he turned to face me. His face looked bruised or dirty. I couldn't tell which. Once his eyes locked onto mine, he started to bang harder and smack the glass. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I was by myself and out in the middle of this office building complex. I grabbed my headset and dialed 911. While getting the operator on the line, the guy was walking back and forth from one side of the glass doors to the next. 911, what's your emergency? The lady's voice was direct. Yes, my name is, and I work at, I need someone to come out. There's a guy trying to break into my office building. While speaking with her, the guy disappeared from view. I tried to look in all directions, but I didn't see him. Out of nowhere, a good-sized rock smashed against the door. I screamed and went under my desk. The operator asked what just happened, and I explained that a rock smashed against a glass door. She asked me if the glass was broken enough to let him in. I didn't want to stand up and look, but she told me to look in order to know where he was. I crawled out from under my desk and just peeked over. Saw a huge crack down the first part of the door. I sank back down and told her to please have the police hurry. She said they were on their way. I've read many of these stories on this subreddit, and people say that the cops couldn't get there fast enough. They aren't kidding. Feels like time is standing still, and you can do nothing. Another smash against the door, but along with that glass breaking sound, sirens could be heard coming towards my building. It was music to my ears. I told the operator that the police had arrived and thanked her for all of her support. I stood back up and looked over the cubicle wall, and the red and blue lights were flashing wildly. But the thing I didn't see was the man. The top part of the door was completely smashed, and the rock was laying on the inside of my entryway. One officer came to the front door, and others were out combing the area. I could see their flashlights moving all around the parking lot. The first officer to come in the building and greet me was a very kind man. He was patient with me and let me explain what I saw again. Soon my boss arrived and checked on me, and then the damage. At some point my husband was called and told I would be escorted home by one of the officers. I took the next few days off, started to look for another job that wasn't by myself at night. When I gave my statement, I explained to the officer that the person could be partnered with an ex-coworker who was fired a few weeks prior for stealing and just not showing up. He knew when people came and went. He knew where we kept the cell phones we were selling, not under lock and key, but under a desk of the provisioner. From smartphones to Blackberries, plus VOP boxes and phone cards. I went on to leave this job a month later and started at a credit card machine company. It was an office full of people, still a call center, but I felt safer, especially with the security and cameras all over the building. Like I said before, this company is no longer around. It was bought up by another company, and they basically liquidated all the funds that were worth something. So dirty man who tried to break into my office, let's never meet again.
When I was a little boy, Mama always brought me to the circus. I loved the trapeze, the lions, but especially the clowns. They made me laugh when I saw their round noses, and still do. I'm 18 now and starting college. I thought I'd have one more joy before school starts, so I went to the circus.
The circus was just how I remembered it. Just a big, old, tattered tent, creaky and rotten wooden stands. This was one of the worst circuses ever, but it had a place in my heart, plus low prices. The show was great. People swing quickly on ropes, tigers bouncing back and forth with the crack of a whip, but finally came the clowns. Fat and skinny, short and tall, this circus had it all. With the last of the pies thrown and the last of the blunders blundered, it was time to go home. Everyone had left, except for me and the performers. I was hiding in the stands. Finally, the lights went off, but I heard no footsteps. But I still heard laughter. The performers hadn't left yet. But could it be the same people? The tent was too dark to see. Suddenly, one spotlight flickered on. The place was very eerie. It was abnormal, and something about it shot fear throughout me. Then, I heard a laugh. I could see a man. He had a weathered black suit and a torn top hat on. An irritating ring that could have only come from a microphone sliced through the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," I heard his crisp voice announce, "welcome to the night circus." He looked up at me. His face wasn't right. Webs of twine were sewed over his eyes and his mouth, yet they still remained open. My heart jumped in terror. "For the first act, we will have our lion tamers do what they do best." The voice rang again. Free show, I thought. Through the opening in which all performers come in, came the lion tamer. He was the same from the first show. Wait, was he? I observed him closely, and to my shock, I noticed his skin was torn in some places. But where the incisions were made, white stuffing was withering out. He took a knife that was in his belt and tore open his own chest. Suddenly, 3 stuffed animals, lions to be exact, sprung from his cotton-filled gape. They moved like real animals, but were only a foot tall and made from fabric. Next, a rusty cage collapsed into the middle of the tent. Inside was a girl, no older than 14. She was grimy and wearing a filthy burlap. She looked directly at me and whispered a silent, "Help." A sweet, salty, clear tear slowly ran down her face like it was reluctantly walking to its demise. The lions got vicious. They sprung into the deteriorating cage and revealed teeth like daggers. They cut into her marble white skin. Her cries echoed through the air, and I could feel her pain. I expected a bloody corpse, and I got one, but mixed with the blood was cotton stuffing, soaked, red cotton stuffing. My eyes subconsciously widened and my jaw dropped. I wanted to leave, but something was keeping me there. The next act was not the expected trapeze, but a sword swallower. He was actually normal. He proceeded to thrust his arm in his throat and pulled out a claymore. He then shoved it back into his throat and pulled it out and in repeatedly. I cringed so hard. He finished, and he bent down in my direction and showed me his throat. It was as if a buzzsaw got stuck in it, but straight, deep, oozing cuts lined his esophagus. He curled into the fetal position and chucked up a stream of blood. No human could possibly have as much blood as I had just seen. The next thing you know, he stops moving, and it feels like you can feel his breath slowly fly away from his brittle body. "And now for the finale! Come our wonderful clowns!" the ringmaster shouted one last time. Out of the gloom came an 8-foot-long leg, one of an insect. It was quickly followed by 7 more, and from the darkness came a spider. Aside from being the largest and wettest goddamn spider you have ever seen, one more thing was off, and that was its head. Most spiders have spider heads, but no, this one had a dirt, dusty clown doll head. Now I could only see its body and the start of its legs in the dim light. A scratchy voice slithered out of the thing.
"I need a volunteer,"
it whispered in the voice of a 4-year-old girl. Its limb shot forward and into my chest. I flew out of the tent and into the night. I ran into the gloomy field. Then I saw the thing lurch towards me. Instinctively, I rolled and saw a dark spire thrust into the ground where my head was. While I had the chance, I crawled into a trench. My lungs were pulsing rapidly, mimicked by my heart. The thing slowly crawled past me, and at that moment, when my brain convinced me I was safe, its head quickly turned into my direction. I was too out of breath to run. I felt a sharp pain in my arms, and sure enough, the monster had its limbs in mine.
"Give me a C,"
belched out the monster. Suddenly, it used another limb to carve into my chest.
"Give me an I,"
belched out the monster again. Another letter. More pain.
"Give me an R."
And, like an X-Acto knife, the pain returns.
"Give me a C."
And the black leg grimly, with no remorse, carved into my skin again.
"Give me a U,"
it said. I was surprised I wasn't dead yet.
"Give me an S."
And that was the final letter. I knew. No more pain. No more sorrow. No more life. And its head rapidly morphed into that of a real human clown.
"And what does that spell?"
it asked one last time.
"Circus,"
I quietly murmured.
"Perfect,"
it said in that of a 30-year-old's voice. And the last thing I ever saw was its black spire thrusting into my face. And, for half a second, blood.